Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Andy Regal, a longtime media executive with an extraordinary career in television and digital journalism. Andy has held leadership roles at major news organizations, including the Wall Street Journal, where he served as global head of video. So, Andy, I've seen a lot of those videos as a
Thank you.
subscriber.
Thank you, Mark.
Prior to that, maybe in the more traditional world of television and cable, he was at MSNBC, where he produced news and talk programs. He was also led video strategy at Consumer Reports, and earlier in his career, developed original programming at Court TV and CBS College Sports. Before I tell you a little more about Andy, anything else from the bio, like particular shows or things that are worth calling out?
No, I've spent my career mostly as an executive producer, vice president of original programming, and I'm very pleased to be with you, Mark, because I made lots of mistakes in my career. And I will just make mention because people may be noticing this is not my favorite mistake, but a mistake nevertheless. I was out running on a path near my house a couple days ago and fell. The mistake was I wasn't picking up my feet. I fell, tripped on a root. And that's why I have a bruise on the top of my head. I didn't want to be distracting to your audience. So I thought I'd just put it out there as a mistake and then we can move on.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that could have been. I'm glad it wasn't worse. It probably could have been worse. It looks like, to quote Monty Python, a flesh wound, merely a scratch.
Correct. And I got up and kept running. So I'm fine.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So, yeah, we're going to hear Andy's favorite mistake story. And we're also going to be talking about his upcoming book. It's titled Surviving Bully Culture, a career spent navigating workplace and a guide for healing. So, I've already welcomed you, but welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be
Yeah.
with you, Mark.
Glad you could join us. So there's a lot I would love to talk about related to the book. Early in my career, in particular, I was subject to or witness, to some workplace bullying. Hearing about it secondhand in healthcare, it's an important, troubling subject. But before we get into that, and maybe this is related to your favorite mistake story. So, what would you say is your favorite mistake, Andy?
Yes. My favorite mistake was a circumstance in which I was an executive producer for famed anchor Lester Holt at NBC News, who just retired over the summer. By the way, he's not a bully boss. In fact,
Good. Yeah, I'd be worried because he seems very nice, but
yes. So I was his executive producer, and this was the first time I had ever worked with him. I had worked on a talk show for MSNBC that got canceled. Actually, the host got sick and passed away. And so they reassigned me to do war coverage for the Iraq war. And they just kind of threw me into it. I was scheduled, but I didn't really get trained. And being a talk show producer or executive producer, being the executive producer of a 4-hour newscast are very different skill sets. So I sat in the control room and tried to watch people doing it. So I tried to train myself essentially. And the way I describe it is if I sat in the cockpit of an airplane and then a week later they said, okay, it's time to fly the plane, probably not a great idea.
Yeah, right.
Amidst all of that, they only had a couple control rooms. So the team that was there for 4 hours before us would finish their shift. They would literally run out, and my team of 10 or 12 people in the control room, director, assistant director, technical director, teleprompter operator, we'd rush in. And we literally have the time of one commercial break to get everything ready for the next 4 hours.
Yeah, wow.
And for war coverage, Mark, as you can appreciate, that means we had reporters all over the world that we had to check in, make sure their audio and video worked. We had videotapes ready, scripts. It was chaotic to say the least. And we had 2 minutes and 30 seconds to get in our seats, get prepared, get the tapes ready, get the reporters ready, all of that.
And at that time, you mean literally tapes. This is
Right,
2000.
before digital, right. So we had tapes ready, correct. So this was a while ago.
Yeah.
And so we rush in, we do all that. And again, I've never done this before. And in front of me is like a cockpit of switches and buttons and things to talk to the various people in the control room and around the world. And they're not listed. Somehow you had to intuit where the buttons were. So I'm sitting there as the executive producer, and frankly, I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't. But I'm the executive producer. It's my job to make sure things are ready. I'm responsible. I'm the executive producer, and I took on that responsibility and I accepted it. We sit down. The director calls us up, ready to go, counts us down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go, Lester. And Lester Holt, the esteemed NBC anchor, who was esteemed at that time and had an unbelievable career at NBC, starts reading the prompter. Well, as I mentioned to you, Mark, I had sat in the week before for a few days trying to figure out how everything worked, or how anything worked, for that matter.
Yeah.
So Lester starts reading the teleprompter. And he's doing fine, but the story sounds eerily similar or familiar to a story that I heard last week. Now, of course, stories have legs and things happen where there's still stories a week later, but this one didn't seem that way. And so then he keeps reading, goes on to the next story. And the next story I remember also, and there doesn't seem to be an update of any kind. And now the director is also starting to notice something odd. He turns, and the executive producer's in the third row of the control room, or in this case, the out of control room. He looks over, he goes, "Is this the right copy?" And probably not in as nice a tone as that.
Right. Might have been a little cursing.
Yes,
Or
that
face
happened.
scrubs. Yeah.
That happened in television, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, over my left shoulder, I hear a young man, he was probably 23 years old, and then I look over and he puts his head in his hands, and he said, "I loaded the wrong teleprompter copy."
Oh.
That's last week's
Yeah.
script. And Lester Holt now is reading last week's script.
He's still going.
He's still going.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do. You can't get in his ear. You can't get in the ear of an anchor while they're talking. You can do it over.
Go if there's that earpiece, and is that a
Right. We call it an IFB, but you can't, because if they're talking, they can't listen. It's just human. You can't. So you can't get in his ear. So all you can do is say, "Go to break," which we did, but you can't explain to him what's happening or anything. So they yell, "Go to break."
like a real abrupt?
Oh, out of nowhere, in the middle of a sentence. And he's, he, with aplomb, he says, "You know what? We're going to take a break. We'll be right back." It's a mess. And of course, I don't know what to do. All I can think of is, this is my fault. This is my mistake. And it was. I was responsible. Now, there were extenuating circumstances, which there usually are when people make mistakes. And I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that, Mark, as we continue. For 4 hours now, or 3 hours and 57 minutes, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to say to Lester Holt, who I've never met. This is my first time working with him, and he just went into the studio. I didn't even have a chance to shake his hand because we're frantically putting scripts together. At the end of the 4 hours, the rest of it went fine. I go to the back door as he's coming out of the studio, and I'm going to apologize for my mistake.
Now, before that, though, like during the commercial break, then somebody was talking to his ear and saying, "Hey, Lester, wrong script. We're going to regroup."
Yes, and I think that I was so appalled and upset and certain I was going to get fired, but I don't recall any particular histrionics. I think they said wrong script. They got the script up, and they went back.
Yeah.
So there was no yelling and screaming, at least not by Lester. I think in the control room there was like some of that.
He rolled with it. I mean, it probably wasn't the first time it had happened.
Probably not, but for me, I had never worked with somebody like Lester Holt. He was the preeminent anchor at NBC News, and here I had humiliated him on the air. So I go back around, and I'm just like, I know he's going to scream and yell, probably fire me or have me fired.
Yeah.
And I went up to him, and I introduced myself. I said, "This is our first time working together, and I'm new at this, and I'm just so terribly sorry about what happened." And he looked at me, we shook hands, and he said, "Andy, this kind of thing does happen. Use your more experienced colleagues who have done this hundreds of times. You'll get there. You'll learn it. It happens. Don't worry about it. Work to get better, and I'm sure we'll work together at some point, and we'll do just fine. I have every confidence in you."
That's great.
And with that, we shook hands. We did work together again, and it was fine. And I've never forgotten it, because he could have easily said, "Let me have your name. You're done here."
Yeah.
And all he had to do was walk down the hall or send an email or a phone call, and I would have been fired.
Yeah.
Even though, and this is kind of the conversation I want to have with you,
Yeah.
Usually when people make mistakes, usually there are extenuating circumstances, there are reasons, there are
Mhm.
explanations.
Mhm.
And in the case of workplace bullying, in my experience in television and through my research, this is not about television. There is high intensity and high pressure in
Mhm.
every job. I don't care what it is. You can be pushing a broom and there's pressure to do well, do it right. And there can be all kinds of people that are going to make you miserable.
Mhm.
And so the one thing we can talk more about this is in this conversation, listen, don't judge. That's
Yeah.
something I learned at the Wall Street Journal from an executive coach.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then you can make your judgments. If the person says, "Well, I really didn't care, and I came to work late, and I didn't care about the assignment," you can make your determinations.
Yeah.
In my case, I hadn't been trained. I didn't know what I was doing, and I tried my best to prepare and all this stuff. So that's my favorite mistake
Yeah.
because yes, it was my responsibility. It was my mistake because I could have checked with the prompter operator to make sure that he had loaded the right prompter.
Mhm.
There's a monitor up on the wall that shows it. I could have caught it, but with everything going on, I was just sitting there kind of frozen. My bad. But I remembered how Lester Holt handled it the rest of my life. This
Yeah.
is years ago. And I also remember, which is why I wrote the book, the myriad of times where I made a mistake or not,
Right.
and I got punished for it. And the bosses had no interest in listening or understanding. They were just interested in dictating and in some cases punishing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad the story about Lester Holt was a positive one. When I first heard his name, I thought, "Oh, no." Like, he seems such like a professional, dignified, a person with gravitas and like,
And
a
he is.
sense of calm. So I'm glad he reacted in a way that wasn't focused on punishment, yet alone bullying. I mean, it seems like, punishment could coexist with the bullying or not. Like, there could be a very calm firing,
Yes, and
and that
bullying.
and I'm such an advocate, here on the show we talk about, learning from mistakes and I think, punishing somebody for human error or a systemic problem where to your points of like you got thrown into this. Why weren't you trained better? What were the circumstances? There's a little more to unpack there, but I think listening and learning leads to improvement and trying to prevent the same thing from happening again.
Well, and what it also does is bullying, workplace incivility, and it's along the spectrum, Mark. There's different kinds. There's sarcasm. Sarcasm can be a form of bullying.
Mhm.
Um, there can be incivility, microaggressions. There's all along the way. Yelling and screaming is one form.
Mhm.
Ostracizing, in my view, is probably the worst. All of these things have impact. And what I would say is, and the reason that I got into this work and wrote the book is because, and there's data on this which we can talk about, but
Mhm.
it has a chilling effect.
Yeah.
I was loyal to Lester Holt. I would have done anything for him. And even now I love telling this story because I like people to know that what you think about him is actually true. So
Yeah.
that's my payback to him for
Right.
to know that he had impact. And this is not, I'm not out for revenge. The people I talk about in my book, the bully bosses, I'm not out for, they hired me. They kept me in their employ
Yeah.
and I often got promoted. But what I'm talking about is good, loyal, devoted, productive, popular employees who are often targeted. And what happens is you lose loyalty, you lose devotion, you lose productivity in a toxic workplace.
I think it hurts quality if people are afraid to speak up about a mistake they think is about to happen.
And you don't want to, and you can't go to the boss and have a conversation, or if you made a mistake, or if you're not sure of yourself, because you don't want to take the chance of getting castigated for it. And so the opposite is true too. The good bosses, the helpful, but I'm not talking about you have to be nice all the time. Everybody, in fact, I was an executive producer for 25 years. I had staffs of 50. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, I had a team in Hong Kong, London, San
Huh?
Francisco, DC, New York. I did lose my temper. I hope not too much. I interrupted people. I banged on a few tables in my career, but I always felt bad about it,
Mhm.
especially if it was capricious. Usually there was a reason, and part of the reason was probably I was having a bad day, you know? And so it's on me, and I apologized and I repaired the relationship.
Yeah.
That's not a bully boss. A bully boss, and I've had bully bosses that I write about that never showed weakness,
Yeah.
never admitted a mistake, and
Hmm.
certainly never apologized.
Yeah.
And these are the distinctions we need to make in terms of talking about this overall issue. The other thing I want to mention real quick, Mark, if I may,
Please.
is again, this is not about television.
Yeah.
My career was in television, but what I write about is that this happens in every industry.
Mhm.
You mentioned healthcare, education, construction, hospitality. I don't where there are people at work, there are bullies at work. And
Exactly.
that's just a fact of life. And so I want to bring attention and dialogue to this because it's legal. There's no laws against it, no matter how much harm is done, unless you're in a protected class. There
Right.
are civil rights codes against somebody saying, "Hey, old man, get out of here. We don't need your old ideas." You can have a civil rights claim, but people are smarter. They don't
Yeah.
do that. It's much
Yeah.
more subtle.
You're saying there's a difference between bullying and something that would become a hostile workplace or something that becomes harassment or legally actionable. It's not illegal to be a jerk, I guess, right?
Correct. And we there is a term in this work called a brilliant jerk, and many of them are. They're not bullies or jerks all the time. Of course not. No one is. And they may even be very good at their jobs. The problem is these guys that have either all the power or proximity to power,
Mhm.
they abuse that power. They identify people that they don't like for whatever reason. And I don't spend a lot of time trying to diagnose them because I think that's probably a waste of time. I work with people trying to help them deal with it.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that one person, he might be good at sales. He might look great in a suit. He might be great in a meeting. And those are all positive qualities, but they ruin so many other people
Yeah.
that the damage is more than the benefit. And we call
Right.
those brilliant jerks because they may indeed be brilliant, but they cause a lot of harm and a lot of damage and hurt productivity. And the
Yeah.
data is overwhelming about the billions of dollars lost
Mhm.
because, and I've counseled people, Mark, that cry on the way to work, people
Yeah.
that can't make it to work, people that have to see psychiatrists. They end up in the hospital, literally. And in the
Oh,
worst circumstances, they can end up suicidal by this. Now, again, that's an extreme example, but it happens and more than it should. None of this. Nobody wants to be bullied at work. I don't care who they are.
right. And yeah, I mean, there's differences. I appreciate these distinctions you're drawing, and I know the book expands on this. The difference between losing your temper and feeling bad and apologizing and trying to have higher emotional intelligence in the future. Learn what upsets you. Learn not to get upset. There's times I get upset and frustrated, and that's kind of part of my own journey to try to prevent
Yes.
mistakes. But I've been under bully bosses where that seemed to just be their MO. Just the constant yelling, belittling, blaming, not taking responsibility. So I want to go back to your story though, because I heard you correct me if I'm recapping this incorrectly, but you were the senior person in the room as the
The
executive
control
producer.
room, the Lester Holt story.
Yeah. So you're
Yeah.
you're the boss, but
I'm the boss. Yes.
in your I heard you taking responsibility for that team's output, even though the fact of the matter in a non-blaming way would be that 23-year-old loaded the wrong copy. But then we could unpack this in my engineer brain and we'd say, hey, Andy, why is that even possible? Or what are the processes to make sure old scripts get put somewhere where they can't be reloaded again? And so I heard you taking responsibility, even though it wasn't directly your action. I admire
Yes.
that.
And I appreciate that. And yes, that's how you get better. That's how you get loyalty. When people feel comfortable that they can make mistakes and not be vilified for it. When they make mistakes and they know, you know what? The boss makes mistakes and he acknowledges. I'll give you an
Yes.
anecdote.
And
I
that's
worked
helpful.
at I worked at a cable network and we weren't on the air yet. And we had a dress rehearsal to orchestrate how it felt to be live because we were going to be a live cable network. And I was one of the development people that developed this network. And so we went to a studio that we had never worked at before, and we were supposed to come hell or high water, be live, quote unquote live at 10 a.m. But remember, we weren't. But it was a dress rehearsal. So we're going to be live at 10, and we were going to be live all day, and we were going to simulate a live day. We had never even been to HBO before where we did this test. And so it's like we got there at 7:30. It took us a half hour to find the bathrooms. And we went around and they're plugging things in, lights and stuff. And at about 9:45, it was clear we weren't going to make it. And the head boss, the CEO, comes storming in, beat red, and he says, "Who-" and again, there was an expletive, but he's like, "Who's in charge here?" Furious that we're not. And I was brand new. I had only been there a couple weeks, so at least this time it was my fault. And I thought to myself, "Well, aren't you in charge?"
Yeah.
And I had another bully boss who, when anything ever went wrong, Mark, he would fire off an email. "How did this happen? How did this happen?"
Well, but what was the tone of that question? It could be inquisitive or it could be an
It
inquisition.
wasn't particularly inquisitive because there was never a follow-up. We didn't, like you said, we didn't have a meeting and say, "Oh, this happened, that happened, this went wrong, that went wrong. What can we do to solve?" That's a good environment. That's a
Yes.
productive environment. That's an environment that has well-being. When people fire off, who did this? Why? What? Without any kind of coming together and problem solving, that's when you hurt. And let's even assume you don't care about your employees. You get mad at them, like you said, this guy that you work for. That
It's counterproductive.
if you don't have to care about the people. Let's even assume you don't, and you'd like to, but you might care about your business.
Hmm.
And billions of dollars in lost productivity. People leave, and then it costs more to get to hire people. So retention, all these things lead to billions of dollars in the United States of lost revenue and costs because of how people are treated. Again, we're not talking about putting your arm around people and being nice all the time. We're talking about caring about and making your employees feel like they matter.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
There-
Is
there-
if
yeah.
you feel like you're just there to be a punching bag. And again, we're not also talking. There's no assault here. Nobody ever, even though it looks like it, nobody ever threw a stapler at my head.
Yeah.
That's assault. What
Right.
we're talking about here is where you make your employees feel like they don't matter and they're only there
Yeah.
to be scorned, yelled
Right.
at, belittled, and ostracized, and then fired.
Yeah. There's the difference between asking, I mean, it's, trendy in some circles. We're going to lead by asking questions. Like there's a difference between what went wrong and what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
I mean, that question's not equally helpful because it puts people on the defensive. It's blaming. It teaches people to hide and cover up mistakes. Now, like you're talking about that dry run of the live day, like the reason for doing the dry run was to figure out the things that could go wrong, maybe in
Yeah.
part, right? Not to be perfect. If you were
Right.
going to be perfect in the dry run, you didn't need it. I would
Yeah.
say.
And again, these were directors and studio personnel and technicians that we had never worked with before. That was a mistake. We probably should have gone over and had a tech rehearsal and met the director and all this kind of thing. And in fact, I will tell you that I learned from that situation. I was a producer at that point quite early in my career. I was in my early 30s. And every time I created a show, and I created quite a few, I made sure that we had all kinds of rehearsal time so that when we went live, it was just like another day. And it was a great lesson.
So I've got to ask. Here's my point. I was going to shoehorn this example in because I think it's a pop culture meme. It's not just an insider news story. When we talk about
Sure.
going live, the famous tape that was leaked, I'm sure by somebody, of Bill O'Reilly getting all upset, like the opposite of a Lester Holt moment, where he was doing a recorded read that was going to be edited into the end of an episode of Inside Edition, and
Yeah.
he didn't like the way it was written, and
Yeah.
the
I've heard that.
phrasing confused him. And instead of asking for clarification, he just gets increasingly upset. And he's like, famous moment. You can find it on YouTube. We'll do it
Yeah.
live, bleep it. Blah,
Yeah.
blah.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that was leaked because that probably, like, somebody was like, "Oh, we finally got one on tape." Like, I'm guessing that wasn't just his worst day ever.
No, that's not a one-off. And yes, somebody leaked that because, and I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because the reason this happens is because it's an abuse of power.
Mhm.
And those of us that it happens to, we don't really have recourse. And I've been asked a number of times, like, well, why didn't you just leave? Well,
Well,
First of all, most of us need a paycheck.
yep.
But even above and beyond that, for me, I had worked my butt off for years to become an executive producer, to create a syndicated show that aired across the country on NBC, to become a vice president of original programming. And so, and I didn't want to let the bully win.
Yeah.
And so, for all those reasons, many of us stay. It's not hard. It's not easy to find a new job. It's not easy to walk out and wonder, how am I going to pay for everything? So we stick it out
Yeah.
for all those reasons. And I actually created a TV show with a sheriff, almost on a central casting in North Carolina, a Southern sheriff, and he went by the moniker of the toughest sheriff in America. And it was a great show, but what it made me think about was how much power a boss has
Hmm.
over all of us. A sheriff has a ton of power because people have lost their freedom.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that this sheriff abused that power necessarily at all, but I'm just saying you have a lot of authority over somebody in jail. A boss has so much power over us about our popularity, our standing, again, our ability to pay our bills, our ability to grow our careers, our self-worth and our self-esteem. And then I'll make one other point, which I haven't made yet, which is a boss, a bully boss also affects our home life. You
Right.
don't just leave it at work. That bully boss is on your shoulder, renting space in your head. These are dramatic and traumatic effects.
Yep.
And so one of the things I'm doing, and most of my work is for bully victims, but if any bosses are out there, you really need to understand the effect that your words and your actions and your behavior have on your employees.
So how often is there some sort of wake up call to a bully boss? Because even if they got feedback, they're probably going to blame the person for being weak. And like, I mean, does somebody really have to hit kind of a rock bottom career wise to say, hey, I got to rehabilitate myself?
Yeah. I have a guy his name's Dr. Gary Namey, who founded the Workplace Bullying Institute, who's been doing this work for 30 years. He's a psychologist.
It's more of an anti-bullying institute, I guess.
Yes, it is indeed, but it's called the Workplace Bullying Institute. But yes, we're all in the anti-workplace bullying work. And he said, Andy, I've counseled thousands upon thousands of bully victims. I've never had a bully boss come to me
Right.
asking for help. Now, there are times where a company identifies a problem and may hire somebody to work with somebody. But in many, look, most of the bullies are not in the mailroom. They're in the corner office. They're in the office next to the corner office. Not always, but they're in some position of authority. And again, it goes back to diagnosing. I can't tell you, Mark, why they do it. Are they sadists? Are they masochists? Are they egoists?
Were
Did
they
they have?
abused at some point verbally and like
There may
their
be very good
upbringing or
reasons.
their previous boss? I've seen like in a lot of cycles, people seem to, kind of pay it. There's a cycle of
That's right.
hazing, a cycle of bullying, right?
Yeah. And so I'm not out to get any bullies with this work. I hope that in fact, I spoke to a group in Baltimore not too long ago, a group of small business CEOs. And at the end of my talk, they were like, oh, now I don't think any of them necessarily were yellers and screamers. They might have been, but we want to create dialogue. We want to create awareness. And again, I hesitate to say it's like the Me Too movement, but in the spectrum of things, and again, being sexually harassed, we don't need to be in an argument about which is worse.
Sure.
It's just that this is an acceptable behavior in our society that needs to stop, or at
Mhm.
least there needs to be awareness. I would almost, even when it's like fraternity hazing,
Right.
it still goes on all the time. And it's like boys will be boys. Well, no, it's an abuse of power in our society that's completely acceptable. And it goes on campuses across this country, different issue.
Well,
But
yeah,
bullies, people say, well, it's just part of work. That's why it's work. Well, no, it doesn't have to be, and it
no,
shouldn't
it
be.
doesn't.
And if I may, people have been working for decades to try to get legislation passed. What I'm here to say is tomorrow, anybody who runs an organization as a supervisor, manager, boss who's listening and watching this podcast, you can create bylaws codes of conduct at your place of business tomorrow, just like they do with sexual harassment. You have to watch a video. You have to sign off that you get it, that you watched it, you understand it, you won't do it. You could do the same for inappropriate behavior, of bullying behavior, where
Can you define it that closely? I mean, being in corporate environments, you go through, the anti-sexual harassment training and, there's all these cut and dry scenarios. It seems with bullying, is it more gray area or can it be defined of like, no, that is objectively bullying?
yeah, great question. And let me see if I can define it for you. There are a number of good definitions. The simplest one that I like to point to is it's targeted harm, targeted behavior with harm that has absolutely no benefit to the employee or the business.
Now, I know leaders that might debate, like, back to this question about dealing with mistakes. I know there are people that they tend not to be the guests I want on this podcast, but there are people out there that say things like, look, if I don't yell and scream at somebody, they're never going to learn, or they may have a very different view of like this quote unquote no business benefit. They might say, well, I have to do this. I'm holding
Well,
people accountable, quote unquote.
yeah, and I'm not opposed to. I worked in sports. I played sports. I got yelled at. I think I mentioned to you I was the executive producer for Coach Bob Knight. I
You
think I
told me
mentioned
that before. Yeah.
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 And he, was a very famous basketball coach and maybe the most famous bully in all of sports
Yeah.
for 20 years or more. The key here is the employee must know that the boss, supervisor, or manager that's doing the yelling and screaming and the misbehavior, that person has their back.
Yeah.
And what happens is we don't know that and we have no confidence. It's one thing if they're encouraging most of the time, and once in a while they get down on you and they raise their voice, but they're like, Andy, I know you can do better. You usually do great work. No problem. That's not what I'm here to talk about.
Yeah. That doesn't sound like bullying.
And that's why I said in my definition, it has no benefit. If you're yelling at me because you want me to be better and you trust me and you want me to be a future of the team, there's benefit to me. I want to get better too. And if you feel the necessity to raise your voice on occasion or be short-tempered, I can live with that if I know you have my back. But in almost all cases, there's no benefit to me other than I lose my psychological safety and I
Sure.
become fearful.
Right. And that hurts the organization. But, back to the targeted piece, one thing that you write about is that it's mostly the high performers who are the most frequent targets of bullying. Tell us, some of the reasons why that is.
Yeah, it's different than that kind of quintessential and cliche notion of the playground, which thankfully doesn't happen as much anymore because most school districts, not all, have 100%, or I should say zero tolerance for bullying, zero. And in my experience, there was 100% tolerance of bullying in the
Oh,
workplace.
yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think on the playground.
On the
Or,
playground.
in the 80s in elementary school.
Right, but now
Now,
what happens in many school districts, they do something about it.
yeah.
In workplaces, they don't have any such things. And that's why I'm arguing for bylaws. Schools have bylaws and codes of conduct now that everybody has to follow. And that's what I'm asking for in workplaces where there's repercussions, by the way, going back to that issue, that there's repercussions if you don't follow it. Just like if you sexually harass somebody, there's repercussions.
Yeah.
Now,
Back to the high performers,
yes,
though, is that
correct.
is the boss threatened by the high performer, maybe?
Yeah, and we don't know for sure. It goes back to this idea that we don't really know, but the research is overwhelming because those of us that get targeted, and again, I was a model target because I grew up in a family where I did all the right things. I was that kid. I wasn't successful in everything I did, but I played sports, I played the trumpet, I worked really hard to get good grades, and I was never a problem for my parents.
Yep.
Okay. And I got a lot of adulation, a lot of love back. And
Mhm.
so I naively went into the workforce thinking, well, that's the approach I'm going to take to the workplace. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to be good. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to be a good team player. I'm going to be devoted. And all I want to do is make the coach, the boss, the manager happy. That's what I'm here to do because that'll benefit me too. I wasn't, selfless, but that was my approach. And you know what? In the workplace, that doesn't work because some bullies, they don't like that for whatever reason. It bothers them that you're nice and and they can smell the fear, by the way.
Yeah.
And I try to get away from self-blame, but they can tell the people they can bully. And some people, I tell this story. I worked with a great producer who was from South Philly. And I'm not
Mm.
sure those two things, but he was a tough guy. I was not, and wimpy people shouldn't be bullied either. It is right. But I never got bullied as a kid, and nobody should be bullied ever. But it's different in the workplace. The people that get bullied are the people that perform. They want to stomp them down. It makes the bully supervisor. Maybe they're threatened. Maybe they don't have the capacity to be friendly and nice and warm and so forth. They have the mean-spirited thing, which often is a good, helps you rise up because you're tough.
Yeah.
And that's why the best people often are the ones that get bullied.
Yeah. It's often, I think it's often said, like, sometimes you have to punch back at a bully, but there's a difference between a playground. I'm not advising kids. I'm not a parent. I'm not advising kids to punch a bully, but,
Yeah.
you see it in, you know, uh, television shows and whatnot. But I'm thinking in the workplace, though, because of the power differential, you can't punch back. That's the problem, right? I mean, how do you best deal with a bully if going to HR might not get you support because it's not technically against any rules or against the law?
And the HR people are scared to death. They're not going to take on a top performer or the CEO or the number two person in the company. In my work, I focus on helping people cope and heal, and there are ways to do that.
Mhm.
Um, there is no way to make your bully boss contrite, for instance. Storm in there and tell them what's what, and
Or
don't
have
you
an
dare.
intervention. It just
Right,
doesn't work.
right. Because they're not those kinds of people. They're unreasonable.
Mhm.
And everything you have is at stake. Now, can that work in the history of work? Has that ever happened where somebody just went in and told them, don't and this friend of mine who was from South Philly, he wouldn't take anything from anybody. He didn't care who it was. And he would have stormed off, told them off, and he would have left because he was tough and he didn't care. And that helped him in his career. So there are people, and there's also people that don't care about their jobs. And so if somebody bullies them, they don't care because they're
Mhm.
going to go home and not care. Those of us that care have a very hard time stepping up and saying something to the bully. And as
Mhm.
somebody that coaches bully victims, I'm not about to say, well, here's what you do. Here's the formula. There isn't one.
It's more
The
of a
formula,
recovery.
yes, the formula is not to let the bully overtake your life and take over all your joy. And I talk about people sharing their light. Don't let the bully boss darken your light completely. And then you lose your self-esteem, self-worth.
Right.
You have all kinds of anxiety, hypervigilance. I had all those things. I had digestive problems because I had no tools by which to deal with this. I
Mhm.
thought I was alone and I thought it was my fault. I had a lot of
Mhm.
self-blame. What's wrong with me? Why do they hate me? Why don't they love me? As I said earlier, look, you can try to talk to your boss, but then you're on record that you don't like them or you don't like the way you're being managed. And it's all about leverage. If you have leverage, like you may leave or you have another job, then you can do whatever you want. But the whole reason this happens is because they have so much power over you.
I just remember the one it's a dusty pop culture reference. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to have watched Leave It to Beaver
Oh,
reruns as a kid. And there is an episode of Leave It to Beaver where he was being bullied by Lumpy. I had to do a quick little side Google. I might have to go back and watch that. But that it's a longstanding issue of like, do you try to ignore a bully? Do you remove yourself from the situation? Again, at work, you can't.
you can't. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that because I haven't had a chance to talk about this. First of all, Beaver, as I recall, had pretty good parents who probably could have protected him if he needed it. Whereas at work, you don't have anybody protecting you in most cases. But let me point this out, and I'm going to be writing about this more in the future. Pop culture, current pop culture, is replete with bullying. Look at the most popular and acclaimed show on the air today, Severance. I don't know if you've
I
seen it.
haven't seen it. I've heard of her.
It's a workplace kind of scientific, kind of social science, futuristic approach to work, but it's a workplace bullying show. The
Yes.
whole thing about how you lose your identity at work, it's sci-fi, and it's got about 28 Emmy awards.
Yeah.
You can also look at The Beast. I don't know if you've seen that. The Beast is about a chef in
Oh, the
Chicago.
bear.
I'm sorry,
Sorry
thank
to
you.
sorry
The
to
Bear.
correct
I
you.
you know, thank
Little minor mistake, but yes,
thank you. The
bear.
Bear is correct. I should know, I'm from Chicago. And the main character, Cam, gets bullied unmercifully by his previous chef boss. And frankly, he is also a bully boss in the kitchen. And so much of it's about the interaction, the yelling, the screaming, what it does to people, how it unnerves them. So, and going back further, like Back to the Future, if you
Yes.
remember the movie, that Michael J. Fox's father gets bullied by Biff, I think, or
Yeah, Biff
in
Tannen.
high school.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Biff becomes his boss,
Yeah.
and there's a great scene where he's bullying him. So it's all over pop culture. And the reason is for all the reasons you'd think, because we can all relate to it.
Mhm.
But none of these shows go into how to deal with it.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so it's a relatable, traumatic set of circumstances, which is why so many shows take place at work. Oh,
Mm.
another great one, Ted Lasso. If you've
Yes.
seen Ted
I
Lasso,
love Ted Lasso.
okay, it's not a European football
It's
show,
a
really.
workplace show.
It's a workplace show,
Yeah.
and it's about humanity and integrity, and why Ted Lasso is so lovable. Why? He cares, and there's bullying in the locker room
Right.
because he
Yep.
sees it, he feels it, and he addresses it. And,
Yeah.
it's just brilliant, and it's
Yeah.
great, and it doesn't happen enough in the real world.
Yeah. And, there are some examples, and they're noteworthy because I think it's not the norm. People I've met or heard speak, the late Paul O'Neill, who had been the CEO at Alcoa, cared
Mhm.
deeply for his employees and took seriously the idea. We don't want you to, the goal is it's beyond not harming you. We want you to go home healthier
Yes.
physically and psychologically than you were at the end of the day. And that correlated with amazing business success. He took responsibility. He was one of these leaders who understands or believes anything that happens under your watch is your responsibility.
Yeah, I
And you
mean,
can't
you're
make that. And not everybody believes that.
no, and they don't think about it, and and managers and bosses aren't taught that. I was fortunate to get some good training at the Wall Street Journal. I thought I was a really good, if not great manager, and I realized I had a ways to go. And we touched on this earlier, Mark, and you just made the point again, which is we're giving our lives to the workplace. Now,
Mhm.
again, some of us are more devoted, but no matter how you look at it, you're giving a third of your life every day to the workplace. And for those of us that do care, and I believe most workers do want to do a good job,
Mhm. I agree.
you bring it home with you. One of the worst jobs I ever had was I was working for kind of a Dr. Phil kind of show, and it was a toxic work environment. I came home, I had a newborn, I had a 2.5-year-old and a newborn, and I was not a good father. I was brittle when I got
Mhm.
home, and I was
Mhm.
working 14-hour days. I was brittle. I was not a good father, and I was not a good partner to my wife. I couldn't sleep. I had recurring nightmares, and then I got up in the morning and I was miserable to be with and miserable in my own skin. So the impact is massive. And of course, then I was not at my best self when I came in because I knew what I was going to be confronted with every day.
Right.
Every day, they made me feel terrible. And in my book, Surviving Bully Culture, I talk about the personalities that caused that. And I dare anyone, and when the book comes out, and I changed a lot of names, by the way, because I'm not interested in
Right.
hurting
There's
anybody.
not an index in the back of bully ball.
No, no. I've changed most of the names because I don't blame these people. I'm beyond it, but I care about the issue and about what they did and why they did it. And I want to try to see if I can mitigate the harm for future employees. Um, Certainly not just in television. As I said, you experience it. Tech. Oh my God, tech's a bad one. Because
And I'm gonna pick it's not just the Wall Street Journal. The media often, glorifies bully bosses.
great point. I mean, all the time. It's the kind of thing they do. There was a movie, and I just saw it publicized where the guy was a band director. Very famous actor. He does all the insurance commercials.
Yes,
And
yes,
I
yes, yes. I haven't seen it. I've heard great things about
Well,
it.
anyway, he's screaming at these kids, And I hated that movie. I
Yeah.
hated that movie because he's screaming at the
Too
kids.
close to home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet he was lauded and he got an Academy Award for the portrayal, but they should not, again, it makes for maybe good drama, but doesn't make for running a good company.
No. I mean,
Uh,
and one other example, I don't know if you've run across Andy, he's retiring soon, Bob Chapman, who's the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller. He's written a book, and it is called quite literally I think it's Everybody Matters or Everyone Matters. You used that type of phrase earlier.
Mattering. Yeah.
And he's one of these leaders who takes responsibility. I've seen him give presentations at conferences about the direct impact of workplace bad management, bad leadership, and the impact on physical health and mental health. And the one thing, and I thought this was so interesting, he said the one metric that they looked at as a way of measuring their culture, because HR had this data, was the divorce rate of their employees.
Wow. I've never heard that before, but that's a great one. That's a great one. And look, like I say fully, I worked at the Wall Street Journal. It was a great place to work. And I write
Mhm.
in the book that it was the pinnacle of journalism. It still is. And that it was the pinnacle of my career to work there.
Mhm.
I don't even consider that it was the Wall Street Journal's fault. I never went to HR because I never thought that that would help, or it just was my problem. And it was really people within the organization that acted inappropriately, in my experience, in my view. Sometimes it is an extension of the overall organization. We have a toxic culture. That was not my experience at the Wall Street Journal, but
Yeah.
it was my experience elsewhere. And it's really, Mark, about awareness. It's really about and by the way, there are more companies now starting to focus on this. In fact, I got a job listing for Fanatics, which is a very big sports collectibles. They're
Right.
like the Disney of sports collectibles.
They run almost all of the major sports teams, pro and college websites with their merch. And
Correct. Good for you. Yes. And they had a listing that came to me that said, we don't want any brilliant jerks.
yep.
We care about our culture. It was in the job posting. We were
Mhm.
looking for somebody who was fiercely competitive. Great.
Yep.
But a team plan, I love to see that. I love to see that kind of thing. I love to hear about the stories you're talking about. And in fact, I'm pursuing companies that care about such things in my work
Mhm.
because they're the ones that can also help lead and show that the best way forward is to make your employees matter.
Yeah. And even Jack Welch, who has, I think, in hindsight, a very mixed reputation,
Hmm.
in his retirement when he was writing and speaking and before he passed, was really emphasizing basically like, no, companies can't tolerate the brilliant jerks. The salesperson that brings in a ton of business, the law partner, the surgeon who brings a lot of reputation and patience in. And, talked about, it's through Harvard Business School, and you love a 2x2 matrix. And it was basically of like low results, high results, right behaviors, wrong behaviors. And he's like, you got to make, and occasionally you hear stories of a hospital system who makes that tough call about the surgeon who's getting the right business results, wrong behaviors. So like, no, we're not going to tolerate that anymore.
Yeah. And they shouldn't. And as we talked about, it does happen everywhere, at every level. And it's also the bullies are all shades of everything. And being a target, Mark, which is also very interesting to me, there is some data that suggests that people who are people of color and or neurodivergent LGBTQI may be bullied at a little higher level. And that's one of the reasons I came out. And I first thought, who's going to care listening to me? Because I was well paid and I did get promoted. So why would anybody care about what I have to say? Well, the reason is not because I was in television, but because I was promoted. I did care. And the research I did made me realize if it's happening to me, it's happening to everybody.
Yeah. This isn't your
Uh,
sour grapes story. It's one to
Absolutely
help.
not. I have fond feelings of the bully bosses in some ways.
Yeah.
So no, this is not what they call revenge memoir or anything of the sort. In fact, I often say laughingly that the people I write about at least hired me. There were hundreds of resumes I sent out to people that had no interest in hiring me.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not suggesting these are bad people. I am suggesting that in these cases they were bad managers. and didn't understand what they were doing to people for whatever reason, and or didn't care, and that may define them as bad people. I'll let people decide that. Um, but that's what I want to change.
Yeah.
That's what I want to change.
Yeah. I appreciate you doing that. Andy Regal has been our guest. The book again is Surviving Bully Culture, a career spent navigating workplace. Is there, I think
Let
there
me
might
give
be
that again.
one.
I left out a word. It's navigating workplace bullying, and that's my fault.
Navigating workplace bullying. Okay. We all make mistakes. Okay, there we go. Surviving bully culture, a career spent navigating workplace bullying, and a guide for healing. I should have called that out and questioned it the first time.
It's
I,
okay.
I, I'd made a mistake. I'll give people a
So
little
that was
behind.
my mistake. I'll take credit for that one too, Mark.
Well, but I read one of I don't often, I don't try to edit out all my mistakes. See, there we go. I
Yeah.
can't make this up. I was not intentionally trying to say the word mistake wrong. But our first attempt at recording very early on, somehow the previous title of Andy's book had crept into the notes, and we'll figure that out why. And I know Andy's not going to be a bully about it. It was somewhere
Yeah.
in the notes or in something. I should have double checked because I know when a book is pre-publication, this is not the first time
It
a
was the
guest
working
has
title.
said, "Hey, the title changed."
And if I have 10 seconds, I'll tell you the original title was, I thought it would be different because every new job that I got after a bully job and I was able to escape somehow, or I lost my job, I got a new one. Every time I took a new job, I thought this time it'll be different.
Mm.
And again, there's always going to be difficult people. There may even be bully bosses. The thing that I want to communicate to your audience is not self-blame, but we can be different about how we respond and react and cope and heal to the abuse of the bully boss. So that's why I called it. I thought it would be different, and we can make ourselves different and cope.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, so I'm going to make this the final question.
Oh, sure.
We hope it would be different, but as somebody goes through, this recovery and as you were saying, repair their self-esteem and try to take a chance in a workplace, is there a way to try to gauge upfront, asking questions as the job applicant to try to suss out if it's a bully culture or if your boss is a bully?
Well, the bullies found me every time, it seemed to me. I don't think there's a way. I mean, you can look at Glassdoor, which is
Mhm.
a website, which, so you can do that kind of stuff. But look, if you get an interview, you need the job in most cases. Now, if you've got a great job and
Yeah.
you're just interviewing, most of us need the gig. And they're going to say, oh, it's a great culture. Everyone loves working here. So that's not really something that works so well. But the thing I'd like to leave your audience with as well is, and I suffered from this black and white thinking.
Mhm.
When the boss was being mean to me, it overwhelmed me. And there were some wonderful things going on at the places I worked. I was creating shows. I was overseeing staff. What I work with my clients on, and what I want everyone to think about here is, it's not all bad. Yes, it's tough when a bully boss, but you know what? There's nice people at work that you can confide in, colleagues, other senior managers. Celebrate your small wins, right? Allow yourself to breathe. Take a few minutes to breathe and relax. It's not all about the bully boss. Know that there are good things both in work and outside of work that can allow you to still find joy and shed your light on others. So that's the main thing. Is I let the bully boss overtake me because I so much wanted their validation. I so much wanted that and needed it. And that was the wrong approach.
Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you so much for your interest in helping others, the writing the book. Again, that is Surviving Bully Culture. Thank you for sharing, your story and your reflections and really highlighting a very important issue. So maybe when, the book is actually available and released, sometimes I do a short follow-up with a guest whose book is out. It would be hard to keep it a short conversation, but there's a lot
Thank
to
you.
talk about.
It's been wonderful to meet you, talk with you, Mark. And I will say the book doesn't come out and it won't be available till April, but it is available for fear of sounding like a salesman or being one.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is available for pre-order on andyregal.com, ANDYREGAL.com, and you'll be able to get the book in the next few months.
As an author, you got to do this, Andy.
Eric.
You gotta. That's all
I'm
right.
spending a lot of money on this, Mark. I need to sell some books.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the
Thanks
opportunity.
again.